the Humanitarian, Development and Peace nexus. Today we're going to talk about how to apply it to the WASH sector through the Resilience and Peace Network framework. This is a collaboration between the German WASH network, between the Global WASH cluster, between the Sanitation and Water for All, which is one of the largest development platforms in the WASH sector, as well as UNICEF. It draws heavily from global policy, from the UN, from the OECD, from the World Bank, and from the Interagency Standing Committee. It also involved expert interviews with more than 40 WASH practitioners and experts covering humanitarian development and peace, and there's been a number of workshops held at the global and regional level. So what are the learning objectives? When you've completed this subtopic, you should be able to, firstly, understand why and when to apply the humanitarian development peace triple nexus and the principles that motivate different actors operating in this environment. Understand what are our collective outcomes and the key triple nexus approaches or ways of working that can be applied to WASH programs. So development process is never linear. In most fragile contexts, there are ups and downs and even reversals that cannot be held up by humanitarian aid alone. And here you can see a big crisis at the beginning, and a number of subsequent crises that have occurred, which is a protracted crisis situation. The humanitarians have been there primarily to save lives and to prevent disease outbreaks, but it's not enough. There are better ways of working. Humanitarian development and peace actors can achieve development holds and long-term cost savings. And here we're trying to ensure, and this is what you can see in the blue line, enhanced development holds. By development partners staying engaged not just outside of crisis, but also within crisis, over the long term, working on prevention and mitigation of risks that would prevent the delivery of WASH services, and also for humanitarians to be able to better prepare to respond to hazards and absorb emergencies when they occur, so being able to institutionalize that change. And also, which requires multi-year funding, and so humanitarians and development partners need to work over the long term. And then also looking at peace building efforts that might also be necessary. And you can see that there are huge development cooperation gains to be made in terms of cost savings anyway. So integrating peace building into humanitarian and development interventions. This begins with a conflict analysis, looking at the context in which you're working in. And this provides the foundation of conflict sensitivity, which should be foundational in a program, so the prevention of violence and doing no harm. And then moving beyond this to use the conflict analysis to address the root causes of conflict. This is where peace building is involved, understanding the needs and vulnerabilities of those concerned and building their capacities, and trying to, particularly in fragile contexts, is to build peaceful societies. And we can do this through WASH programs can do this through three different mechanisms. The first is connecting institutions with communities, so building up trust, social cohesion between communities and service providers and the government and the state. And using WASH services to enhance relationships between communities, so using it as a point of building trust and social cohesion. And then as well, focusing on individual capacities to prevent violence and build peace. At the core of applying the resilience and peace framework is understanding the risk context in which you're working. So here we have the three spheres of humanitarian, development and peace. This is where actors and programming all comes together. And in the middle, we have the humanitarian, peace and development network. This is particularly relevant in contexts where there is a high humanitarian and a high fragility risk. And fragility can be seen as poor governance, instability, and inability for a government to provide its basic services, such as water and sanitation. And we know that conflicts drive 80% of all humanitarian need. So this comes from a recent World Bank report, and is very much meaning that the triple nexus is where many of you will be working, or it's relevant in many cases. The next is a humanitarian development nexus. This is where there's a high humanitarian risk, but not necessarily a high fragility risk. And so the peace actors may not need to be involved. Next is the peace development nexus. And this is where there's a high fragility risk, but there's not a humanitarian issue, so humanitarians need not be involved. And then lastly, humanitarian and peace nexus. And this is where development partners are not necessarily involved, where you have high humanitarian, high fragility, and high development risks. And so that's where you would have where a humanitarian peace nexus would operate. So who are the key humanitarian development peace actors in the WASH sector? On the humanitarian side, we have government departments working at the national and subnational level, such as Disaster Management Authority. We have coordination structures, such as the WASH cluster, which can be sometimes led by government, sometimes led by UN agencies or NGOs, or a combination of all of those. And then we have NGOs who have a specific humanitarian mandate, such as MSF, and donors such as ECHO. On the development side, we have development banks such as the World Bank, such as KfW. We have WASH sector coordination platforms that can be operating at different levels. It can be a donor platform, it could be a combination of actors and donors. And then we have NGOs that are specifically working in this area, such as Water Aid and Plan. We have UN agencies that are specific for development, such as UNDP, and even donors such as DevCo. And working in the middle, we have government departments, such as the local government. We have multilateral agencies such as UNICEF, IOM, IFRC, and a number of NGOs such as Oxfam, ACF, and SAVE, and a number of donors who are operating in this triple nexus environment, such as the Swiss Development Cooperation, and we also have the British and US governments. And working across humanitarian and development, we have utilities, we have the WASH ministries, and we also have, in many cases, humanitarian development coordination structures established that can bring together the WASH cluster and the WASH sector coordination. We have, between development and peace, NGOs working like ECHO Peace, Middle East, and then working in the more fragile environments where development's not possible, agencies like ICRC, and then UN Peacekeeping and UNHCR, and they are also operating more towards development too, so I've got them straddling the line there. So despite the different actors, there are many common principles, and this is not what most people think. They think that because there's a different language that humanitarian development and peace workers speak, and that there are different timelines and different mandates, that we don't share common principles. But in fact, the majority of the principles we share are common: humanity, inclusion, resilience, localization. At the same time, we need to also respect the fact that humanitarians, for example, highly value neutrality and impartiality as important principles, and development partners highly value contributing to peace, and in many cases, government-led. So what is the WASH resilience and peace framework? There are three main components. There is the vision, where we want to achieve globally. There's the collective outcomes, which is more at the programmatic level, which is the outcome that you'll agree on as a humanitarian development and peace actors. And then there's the ways of working on how to achieve those collective outcomes. It's compatible with current WASH approaches and tools. This could be the WASH systems approach, it could be WASH climate resilience, etc. It's also applicable to any configuration of WASH sector building blocks. This could be if you're working on financing, if you're working on monitoring and evaluation, and others. The audience is in-country policymakers and practitioners, and again, the programming level we're targeting is in-country policymakers service delivery, and the community. So the WASH Triple Nexus vision is to align with the 2030 agenda, the Sustainable Development Agenda, and to also align with the recommendations that came out of the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, to ensure resilient and sustainable WASH services for all. This is inclusive of all groups, leaving no one behind, always, so in crisis and outside of crisis, and everywhere, so not excluding any geographical areas. To achieve this overall vision by 2030, we come down to the program level, and here we're focusing on WASH program collective outcomes. Again, these are outcomes that can be achieved by humanitarian development and peace actors working together, and these should be modified on context, based on the context you're working in. If it's drought relief, if it's working in the prevention of disease such as cholera or COVID, and many other risks that you may be facing. But the overall vision, the overall outcome is enabling the delivery of resilient, sustainable, and inclusive WASH services and behavioural practices, and foster opportunities to build peace. So developing a collective outcome together while respecting individual actor outcomes is an important part of this. So ensuring that the humanitarian outcome that the humanitarians are working on, that the development outcome the development partners are working on, that the peace outcome that the peace actors are working on is also respected, and will need to be accommodated for in the delivery of a collective outcome. So WASH resilience and peace, let's break down the actual outcome into sub-outcomes to make it more manageable. Here we're talking about prevention. So this is where the prevention or mitigation of disaster is particularly relevant for development partners to be working on. Early warning, early action, so anticipating disaster. This may not be designing a system, it could be linking into existing systems, it could be community-based systems that are made from the grassroots level. Preparedness, so this is absorbing, adapting, and responding to disasters to ensure that we're better prepared for emergency. So this may be working with a utility to have a better, to institutionalize capacity, resources, and so forth to be able to respond to risks in the future. Recovery, so ensuring that we have a rapid recovery from disaster in a more efficient and effective manner, and we're not taking funds away, particularly from development in the future. And also ensuring that we have a peace building element, and at the foundational level it might be conflict sensitivity, but also looking towards addressing the root causes of conflict and supporting peace capacities, particularly in fragile contexts. So the ways of working, they can be divided up into coordination and operations on one side, and then the next slide talks about programming and financing, and this is how we come together, and it's often been a neglected part of a successful Nexus operation. So fostering inclusive humanitarian and development coordination platforms at the national and local level is the first, and this is using existing platforms where possible, but also you may need to actually build one yourself if there's not one there already. Motivating higher levels of collaboration by developing mechanisms to build trust and accountability between partners. So this could be sharing information like in a coordination system, to working towards higher levels of collaboration and trust where resources are shared and there are a number of joint activities that occur between partners. And this leads to the next point, which is really fostering joint assessment, analysis, planning, action, and monitoring as being a core part of working on the triple nexus to ensure that there's cohesion in programming as well. Using adaptive management processes to learn, adapt, and make better decisions. So this is understanding that the environment is very fragile, is volatile rather, and that that real-time information needs to be used to help operations move in and out of crisis and be adaptable to the context. So ways of working from a programming and financing perspective, fundamental is applying a risk-informed and conflict-sensitive approach, as we spoke about in the beginning with regard to peace building, and where feasible and appropriate, social cohesion and peace building approaches. So taking risk from a multi-risk perspective, those risks that may affect the delivery of WASH services. And applying a system strengthening approach, so prioritising local WASH services. So this may be working with local service providers to be able to absorb refugee intakes and ensuring that there's a peaceful existence between the local community and the refugees. Using one information and mutual accountability system inclusive of vulnerable groups. So this is ensuring that there's accountability to affected populations, but also that the information on service delivery and infrastructure is passed down to humanitarians during crisis, that they understand the systems that are there and respect those and use those where feasible, and that information is passed back to development partners as they move out of crisis. And using an adaptive system to support rapid transition between crises for a more effective and efficient delivery particularly back to development. And using adaptive and sustainable WASH financing strategies, this is ensuring that financing follows the operation inside and outside of crisis, and that we're also able to leverage financing into vulnerable countries, into fragile contexts. So finally, this is the WASH resilience framework. I've talked about the approaches and how they can be applied to any type of WASH program or WASH sector building blocks, moving from activities to outputs. These will lead to our outcomes on prevention, early action, preparedness, recovery, and peace building, which work towards the context-specific collective outcome statement. And then overall, by 2030, aiming for WASH resilience and peace. Finally, I've left you with some references. Some are at the global, these are at the global level, and then there are peace references, and there are WASH specific references. Thank you.